Dr. Mark. Attendance?
Yes, attendance. Yeah, thank you. Let me just give you a little sketch of this week, because this week is going to be a little different. There you go. Wednesday, Miriam, you're presenting, right? And Germany? I sure hope you know something about Germany.
I'll try.
And then Friday is going to be different. Let me explain. Dr. Ken Brown's funeral is on Friday. And I really feel like I should be there for that. Of course, his sons are Dr. Dan and Dr. Doug, and they both played a significant role in my life during the time I was working on my doctorate. And not only that, but Dr. Ken Brown, used to be the president of Denver Baptist Bible College before they merged with Faith. So there's just a lot of connection there. And that's at Cambridge at 10:30, I think it is, on Friday morning, which means I'll be leaving here probably after Romans class or so to get up there, and maybe after chapel, I don't know. And so what I want you to do, since that's the day we do the discussion, I want you to go ahead and have the discussion, okay? So it's really, really important that everybody reads the chapter carefully and makes some notes so that you have some fuel for your discussion. All right?
What's the quiz? Is that Wednesday or Friday?
I will make up the quiz and probably just, I don't know, I'll figure out how to give it to you. What are you laughing at? What?
The thought of us having the discussion on our own.
Well,
It's just hysterical to me. I don't know why.
okay, but if everybody writes down 3 significant things, or maybe a few more if you want, then there shouldn't be, I doubt that you guys are going to make the same observations. So just, you can even take turns, start with Matthew, share 3 things that you learned, just go around. And, I think you can do it. I really do. I think you might find that it's chapter 9. Oh, no, no, it's not. It'll be chapter 4. Wait, oh, you know something? Oh, dear. I just noticed on here. Okay, actually, how do you like that? This week is the week that we don't have a chapter reading. That's not good. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. See, if you look on your schedule, chapter 5 is actually, the discussion for that is scheduled to be a week from Friday. Is there any reason why we can't just draw it up to this Friday instead? Anybody ever? Yeah, Laurel?
I'm not going to be here.
You're not going to be here.
Yeah. You can still do it, but I'm not going to be here.
All right, then, yeah, okay, here's what we're going to do on Friday. We're going to skip class. I just don't see okay? Yeah, because if you're not here, if we were a huge class and one student couldn't be here, but I think probably we just won't have class then. That's going to put us a little behind in our discussion, but we'll be okay. We'll catch up. I don't know what else to do. So Friday, I'm not planning to have class.
Sorry, I was not laughing at you. I think I'm sleep deprived. I don't know why I lost it.
Well, you can laugh at me anyway. I'm used to being laughed at. In Brazil, everybody laughs with and at everybody. It's just part of the Latin American culture, so I'm used to that. All right. So here we are, Adoniram Judson, okay? Point number 10 is that he experienced ups and downs with the changes in government leadership. Now, where is he serving, or where was he serving?
Burma?
Burma, today known as Myanmar, right? Okay. Remember that at this time, England and Burma are warming up for war, okay? And things have not been good. Remember that Britain has made inroads into India with the East India Company. The British Empire is all over the place. And some of the countries are starting to react against that. And Burma was reacting. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, but right now Burma is in an ongoing war internally. It's a civil war. if you talk to any of the students here who are from Burma, they can tell you about it. You know, it's not Burma against another country. It's a tribe in Burma that has basically taken over the country, and it's not gone well. The economy is tanking because of that, and there's a lot of fear, and so things in Burma are not healthy right now. If we wanted to go and do a mission trip in Burma right now, we really couldn't. So, but in this case, it was Burma and England at odds with each other, okay? And so what happens? Well, one of the things you have to remember is that, okay, what nationality is Adoniram Judson?
English? Oh,
He speaks English, but his nationality is, he's American. Okay, remember, William Carey is English, right? But Judson was an American. But if you're a Burmese, okay, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between an American and an English, a Britisher, okay? This is one of the problems. He's going to get himself in trouble, not get himself, he's going to end up in trouble, even though he really has nothing to do with this conflict. This is Burma versus England. He's an American, but the Burmese don't see the difference, okay? So one of the things that he did, we'll come back to that issue with the war, but one of the things that he did is he saw the need to find a public place to hold meetings, because in Burma, if you met in a home, it was viewed as secretive, it was viewed as suspicious, okay? And so he recognized the need to find a public place to meet. Now, you know, if God, wherever God takes you, that's one of the things you have to deal with. For instance, even in our country, there are a lot of people that are promoting the idea of house churches, but house churches, by some people, are viewed as kind of cultish, even if they're not. That's the way, you know, this group of people is showing up at his house every week, you know what's going on in there. And so that's something that you have to deal with when you're thinking about how to meet. And so what he did is he came up with an idea using the Zayats, which are public locations. I'll show you a picture of those, a few of those in just a moment, where you could come and have a debate. You could have any kind of meeting you wanted to, and nobody was suspicious because it was a public meeting place. So he really did a good job in coming up with that idea. He did struggle with tropical fevers. Okay, he struggled with the language. His wife did better at learning Burmese than he did. Studied with tropical fevers, which a lot of people do. Okay.
What is that?
It could be a number of things. Like the most famous tropical fever would be what? What's the one that seems to be most
Malaria?
common? Malaria. Yeah. In fact, I know a missionary who had to leave the field because he had so many bouts with malaria that the doctor says, if you get malaria again, it may kill you. Even though quinine was invented to really, you know, serve as a cure, when your body builds it up, you know, over time, you could eventually die by getting it. This guy I'm thinking of has had it like 10 or 12 times. So he's actually back in the States pastoring now because of that. So that's the biggest one. There are lots of them. There's a dengue fever that was common in Brazil. It's similar to malaria, a lot of throwing up and diarrhea and all that miserable stuff, fever, yeah. And then their little son Roger passed away as well. And that, you know, I mean, just really, really, you know, think about it. Matthew, if you're the leader in your home and you're going, but even you ladies, you're making a decision together with your husband. When something like this happens, you start asking questions like, are we really absolutely sure that God led us here? Because little Roger probably wouldn't have died if we had not come here. There are all kinds of little attacks that come to your mind when something disastrous happens on a field. That's why it's so really, really important that before you ever go, you're convinced this is what God wants us to do. And you're prepared to pay whatever price God may want you to pay. So, and then Anne has health issues. And she actually has to come back. So Ad Niram has to make a decision. Do we all go back? Or do we just send her? And they decided just to send Ann back to recover, and he continued the work there in Burma. Pardon?
What was she recovering from?
I don't know if it said specifically. It was probably malaria, one of those. I'm not. If it said, I don't remember. Okay, let me see if I can dig it up real quick. But hang on.
So I feel like it mentioned a few different things with like health struggles, but then also like a miscarriage or a birth or something.
Yeah, there was a variety of things. Yeah, hang on here. Go back here too. Okay, let's see. Yeah, she. Yeah, they both had frequent bouts with tropical fevers, and baby Roger, born to them the year after they settled in Rangoon, died of a fever at 6. It's all it says is a fever. And then it says in 1820, they returned to India for medical care for Anne. And 2 years later, she had an extended sick leave back to the US. So it doesn't say, there may be another book that does. I'm sorry, I don't know what it was, but I'm guessing it was tropical fever of some sort. And miscarriage and all that would have weakened her system. Tropical fevers are especially vulnerable, you become especially vulnerable if you're weakened, you're tired. But so when she goes back to the US, what's he gonna do? He buries himself in translation. I mean, look, today, if you're part of a Bible society and you're translating the Bible, it takes, all things being equal, it takes about 5 years to translate the New Testament and an average of like 20 years to do an Old Testament. I mean, just, again, it depends. And Burmese is not an easy language. It's not a Latin-based language. It's not, but he translated the New Testament in less than a year. And I think we mentioned last time that that translation is still available. People still, it's not as good maybe, but he did it. So here's the war now between Burma and England that we're talking about. There's a medical doctor there that he becomes friends with, okay? And I think the medical doctor is also an American. I can't remember that for sure. Yeah, but anyway, Anne returns from the States, but then these guys are both imprisoned as spies. Anybody that looks English is going to be suspicious. And so as the war gets going more and more, it becomes more and more dangerous for anybody that looks English or speaks English to be there. And both of them are imprisoned as spies. He tries to tell them, look, I'm not a Burmese, I'm an American. Something I learned in Brazil, that I'll pass on to you. There are times in a foreign culture where you can try as hard as you can to state the obvious and make it clear that you're not involved in whatever. But sometimes foreigners get an idea about you that you are not going to change, no matter how hard you try. For example, in Brazil, I worked really hard to try to convince people I'm not rich. I tried to explain that I'm a middle-class American, I'm very average, but they're not looking at me as a middle-class American. They're comparing my salary with their salary. So no matter how hard I try, I'm rich. And I just decided, it doesn't do any good to try to disprove that. And he had the same issue with his nationality. He could show him his passport. Look, I'm an American. See, it's right here. Doesn't compute. You speak English, you look English, we're taking you as a spy. He said, that's not fair. Well, maybe it's not, but that's something you have to deal with. Don't always expect to be treated fairly, and be careful that you don't accuse the other culture of being unfair, because sometimes it's just their perspective, He really dealt with severe depression, even in prison. And not just during his time in prison, but even after that. Let me go just a second. Is that the last point on Judson I gave you? Or is there another page I'm trying to remember?
Could you go back?
Yeah, I'll go back. Okay, let me give you a little bit more detail here. eventually, he and his friend were released from prison. What happened is the war was starting to come to an end. The Burmese government needed somebody who spoke English to serve as an interpreter when they were making negotiations to end the war. And by God's grace, he was permitted to serve, chosen to serve as a translator, which got him out of prison. Okay, what would have happened to him if that hadn't happened? But there was one point where he and his friend actually were on what you would call a death march. They were being transferred from one prison location to another. And they came to a place, you may remember this in your reading, where they crossed a bridge. And he could have just fell over the bridge and ended his life and done with it. And God gave him the grace to continue on. He expected to die anyway. His wife, when she came back from the US, she was permitted to make visits there to the prison occasionally. And apparently she had to make almost bribe some of the prison guards by giving them some food or money so that she could get in and see her husband. And so that did happen as well, but it really, really, really weighed on his mind. He felt responsible for her bad health and the condition she was in. And she even had to find someone that could nurse her baby because she didn't have milk. I mean, it was really bad. And so he felt responsible for all of this. I am not being the husband and the father that I'm supposed to be. And so it's all my fault. So even after he was released from prison, I think she had to go back again or something. She had to be gone for a while. And he went out into a forest and he dug a hole and he stood by it and contemplated just falling in and making it his grave. And that's how depressed he was. Just wasn't sure if he could go on. And by the way, as you know, Anna eventually dies. And God brings him through that time of depression. And he actually recovers. And he goes back to the States and he remarries. And so he marries someone quite a bit younger than he. And he is able to continue. So basically, there's more to the story. There's a lot written about it, but he's one of the missionaries that is able to come through depression and continue. But I will say this. I don't know of any missionary, and maybe there is somebody, but normally when somebody comes through depression like that, I mean serious depression, even though they recover, they continue to have to be careful because most recoveries aren't 100% returns to what they were before. Does that make sense? And so he and he had to be careful. And sometimes when people recover from something like that, they feel like, yes, praise the Lord, now I can go full blast and end up having another bout with it. So I'm amazed at how many missionaries struggled with depression. Who else have we already studied that dealt with depression? Who's the guy that served for 5 years and dealt with depression? Died of tuberculosis. Was engaged to be married to the daughter of Jonathan Edwards. David Brainerd. I think William Carey wrestled with it as well. It's amazing how many of these, we consider them heroes, missionary heroes, wrestled with depression. And I think that all of us understand there are two kinds of depression. There is what we call organic depression, which actually has to do with some sort of a biological issue, a hormonal imbalance or chemical imbalance of some sort. And we refer to that as organic depression. But there's also depression that doesn't involve you. You're perfectly healthy, but because of circumstances and lack of sleep, or whatever, you can fall into depression as well. And Carrie's wife dealt with that. And so did Judson. But the thing is, Judson's not really remembered for that, because even though he went through that, by God's grace, he was able to come out sufficiently to carry on his ministry. So just a reminder that we are weak vessels. They are really dependent on God's grace to get through. All right, well, there's so much more. This is Andover Seminary. His dad helped to found. Remember when he came back, he got saved, and he came back home. He studied there, and he got saved while he was studying here. And as far as I know, it's the same building, same location. This is fun. Look at this. Somebody, remember, support was not sent directly to the missionaries. Support was sent to the organization. The organization paid the missionaries. And here is a receipt for a gift given in the amount of 10 cents. You know, I mean, money was different back then. Somebody gave 10 cents to help, and it's not given specifically to them, because again, the money was given to the mission organization. The mission organization decided who got what money. Different today. If you join a mission agency today and you're supported by churches, that money comes in, that money goes to you, to your account. But that wasn't the case back then. 10 cents. Missionary Pocket Morning Star, signed James M. Gordon. Apparently he's the treasurer, or was the treasurer back then. Interesting, huh? I thought that was cool. This is a famous picture of Adoniram and Ann Judson departing with others that went along for their trip. And of course, it's on this trip that they change their position on baptism and leave the Congregational Church. Yeah. And this is the guy, do you happen to remember the name of the guy that traveled with them and actually helped them through this transition from one organization to another? I wouldn't expect, Luther Rice. There's actually a seminary in, I don't know if it's in Kentucky, I don't remember where it is. Luther Rice Seminary today, it exists today, named after this guy. Yeah, there he is, Luther Rice. Named after Martin Luther. So here's where they served. So they're in this lower section of the mainland of Burma. Of course, India's right over here. It's basically a neighbor to Burma. And that's where they spent most of their time. When I talk to our Burmese students, they speak several languages. Many of them speak a Chin language. There's several Chin languages they speak. And have you met Van P? He was in my office and showing me some things on the map where he's from and all that. There you go. You want to learn Burmese? I mean, what do you think when you look at that?
Is it similar to Arabic where it reads backwards?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think so. If that's a period, that's a good question.
They were telling me that they have it like that, and they also have like English alphabet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true of a lot of languages. Some languages will have, not a lot, but there are some languages that will have you look at some African languages, they have the English alphabet letters, and then they have a more indigenous version. Very circular.
It says it's reading, you read from left to right.
Left to right, thank you. Okay, yep. And somebody's going to read this year in admissions conference, our language reading. Yep. I think it's Lala. It might be Lala that's going to read it. I don't remember. What's that?
Is that a Bible?
I don't know. I just found an example of reading online. I have no idea what it says. It might be a cuss word. Who knows?
Wait, so you're gonna have Law read this language?
Actually, the law reading, who's reading Burmese? Lala? So, yeah, they actually print out the verse. The verse will be on the screen. Yeah, I have I don't know if you remember from last year, I have the language up here and then English down here and then the name of the person over here.
You should have Law read this and translate it for you.
Yeah, she may have. Maybe she took this class. She may have done that for me. I don't remember. Yeah. Yeah, but I just wanted to find a really good example. It was easy to see. So I don't know what it says. Here's the Zayas. Remember we said he was going public in his meetings? And this is the type of thing even today that exists. You can rent or reserve, to have a public gathering of some sort. And nobody's going to make a big deal of it. Here are his 3 wives. So they had a triple wedding. No, just kidding. my wife and I were married in a double wedding, and so sometimes I'll say that. I'll say, I was married in a double wedding, and then they let them think for a minute that I married 2 gals at the same time. It's not what we mean by that. So she is definitely the most famous. Sarah Boardman was actually the widow of a missionary who passed away, and then she ends up meeting Judson. And Emily Chubbuck was a writer. She actually, she was like half his age. He's like 52, she's like 26. And she, people were kind of, when he remarried Sarah, nobody really thought too much of it, although some thought he got married kind of quick, okay, after Anne died. But, you know, people are going to talk. But when he married her, there was a lot of talk. Like, okay, half his age. She wrote stories for a secular company, you know, but she was a believer. But she, all three of these wives actually did a really, really good job of helping him. There's not really, none of them go down in history as being, you know, bad choices. All three of them were faithful in their service to the Lord alongside of him. So, but interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, okay, here, speaking of Sarah Boardman, again, she's the one here in the middle. Okay, so here's her story. And she and her husband, George, arrive in Burma at the close of the Anglo-Burmese War. So remember that Adoniram went through that war. He became a prisoner, right? He's released at the end of the war to help negotiate terms, translating. And it's about that time that Sarah and George Boardman arrived there. See what God's doing? It's just amazing. Here's these two couples. And little do they know that eventually there's going to be a remarriage going on. And of course, they come at the end of, after the death of Anne Judson, his first wife, and they minister among the Karens. That word Karen is pronounced Karen, Karen tribe. And we, I think, you remember Ekushi? Anybody? Were you here when Ekushi was here as a student? She had a sister. They were from the Karen tribe. When Eku graduated here, they all came decked out in beautiful, bright colored red, you know, Burmese clothing. It was really cool. But that's the Karens were one of the lower class tribes. Okay, they were not highly respected. And somewhere in their history, somebody had a dream or a vision or something, and they about somebody bringing a book of life to them, you know, and you know, I don't know. I'm just telling you whether that was actually of God or not, I can't tell you. But fact is, eventually, that book of life does come. Somebody brings a Bible. And this guy right here, you don't need to remember him, but he becomes a convert, early convert among the Karen tribe, having had access to the Bible. Yeah, and then George Boardman dies, and Sarah then marries Adoniram. And you know, they were careful about it. Intention took time, because you don't just, some did criticize it for marrying quickly, but look, they're both on the field together there. You don't just hop on a plane and ride back tomorrow in the United States. You know what I'm saying? And they both had to stop and think about this. And it just, sometimes, we've commented on this before, sometimes marriages in a missions context became much more practical than they did romantic. I'm not saying that he wasn't romantically attracted or she wasn't, but they probably saw this as almost like a need, like this is something God is directing us to do. She had a little guy named Little Chief, little boy. You know, he had a family. And I wouldn't say it was forced. I think it was natural, but I think they both recognized that God had his hand in this. The kids needed a mom and a dad. Does that make sense? So it wasn't just a contract. I think it was more than that. But just remember, too, that our culture is one of the few cultures in the world where romance is the basis for marriage. Think about it. If you're not romantically involved with somebody, you're not going to marry them. Go to India, and you may not even hardly know the person you're going to marry. Your parents arrange it for you, and you learn the romance comes later. Isaac's servant goes and gets a wife. I'm sorry, Abraham sends his servant to go and get a wife for Isaac. Isaac's never met her. Okay, they come back and they get married and they learn to love each other. If some of you watched the movie Fiddler on the Roof, the musical Fiddler on the Roof. It's got some of the most beautiful music. Well, in there somewhere, the mom and the dad, they talk about how they struggled to learn to love each other. And it's almost comical in the musical. But if you watch it, or if you remember that, you'll catch that, because they talk about how they learned to love each other. So interesting things happen. There's a picture, I think that's George Borman. I'm not totally sure. I looked and looked and looked, and I can't, it looks like GEO on there. But anyway, if that's him, he's the one who passed away. I'm going to skip this poem. There's some Karens in Burma. You know, it's a thriving tribe today, but again, it's a lower class tribe. It's not one that has a lot of political clout. Right? And then this is interesting. Judson Memorial Baptist Church is where the main place of worship for the Karen community in the city of Mandalay. And notice it's called Judson. I don't see the word memorial on there, but it's called Judson Baptist Church. I don't know when it was built, but that I couldn't tell you. All right. So, white man's graveyard. We're supposed to get into, we're going to get a little behind with Friday and everything, but you know something, we're just going to deal with it. We'll get through. Okay. The Moravians arrived early in the Cape Colony of Africa. We're switching to Africa now, okay? Where's the Cape Colony? It's actually down south here. I'll show you a better picture. In Africa, there's the problem of racism and colonialism. Okay, we've already talked about both of those, and they're a big deal. What country is down in that Cape Colony area now? What's way down there at the bottom of Africa? South Africa. And what country has had more of a racist problem than South Africa? I mean, historically, it's made the headlines probably more than any other country when it comes to racism. You've heard of Nelson Mandela? He was in fact, there's a movie out, if you have a chance to watch it, I think it's pretty good. And then many missionaries had an evolutionary concept of the African. See, how could a missionary believe in evolution? Well, you have to remember that theistic evolution was really popular in the 1800s. The idea that evolution happened, but God controlled it. There were a lot of Christians buying into that idea. Okay, evangelical Christians, as far as I know, reject that idea today. But many of them believe that, yeah, God controlled the evolutionary process called theistic evolution. Some of them had this idea that the Africans were less evolved than the white man. Try that one today in our country, see how far you get. Yeah, the interesting thing is, if you are a true evolutionist, even in our country where racism is such a big problem, if you really are going to be consistent with your own evolutionary mindset, you have to admit to some degree that has some truth in it if you're an evolutionist. There are a lot of contributions made to African missions by the missionaries. But do you remember reading, I can't remember if this is part, I think this is part of your reading. What was the greatest contribution made to African missions? This is a subjective, opinionated idea, but what was presented?
Bible translation?
Yeah, good, Matthew. A lot of contributions made, but Bible translation was huge. Does anybody know how many countries there are in Africa? Somebody want to Google that real quick? I don't know. How many countries are there in Africa?
54.
54? And then within those countries, there are several languages spoken in many cases, in fact, most of them. And so Bible translation becomes a big deal in getting the Word of God into the mother tongues. What three languages can you use? I learned this from a Bible translator. There are three main languages that can be used to understand most any language in the world. You have an understanding of these three languages, you can probably approach most any language and translate it. What would they be?
was your question?
3 languages that are considered foundational for understanding most other languages in the world. If you have a grasp on these 3, you have pretty good capability to address another language that's different.
Latin?
Okay, Latin's not a modernly spoken language today, but yeah, that would, yeah, Spanish,
Is Chinese
Would
one?
French be one?
French, and English. Now, I may have gotten the Spanish one, but I know French is one and English, because a lot of Africa, especially, speaks French. English is the other one, Spanish, oh dear.
I think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. And again, it's not like if you know those 3, you can speak any language. I'm not saying that, but the grammar of those, the structure of those languages really gives you a foundation for confronting new languages. And lots of varied talents. We already mentioned translation. Aviation becomes huge in Africa. You just look at the size of the continent, and okay. Medical missions, big in Africa, huge. Okay. Ham radio, have you ever heard of ham radio? They don't even use that anymore, I don't think, but that ham radio was a technology I don't understand. It was a way you could communicate by radio in the early days. These 2 guys, well, the guy on the right is much more famous than the guy on the left. Who's the guy on the right?
David Living.
David Livingstone. Who's the guy on the left? It's not Santa Claus. It's David Livingstone's father-in-law. Okay? And he's not nearly as well known. What's his name?
Well, then, now,
Moffat?
Robert Moffat. And there was some clash between these 2 families, okay? Moffat was pretty authoritarian, and Livingston had a mind of his own. So you can imagine that there was some disagreements between the 2 of them. There's an early picture of Robert Moffat when he was just a kid. So he was the father-in-law of David Livingstone, much less known, but and I think he was really a good father-in-law overall. He was, like I said, he kind of wanted Livingstone to conform to his family and be drawn into his family. And he had a lot of talents. And he liked gardening. Who else liked gardening that we talked about? Laura, what were you going to say?
Nothing.
Who else? Remember who liked? Yeah, remember he was a botanist, but he had allergies. Well, Moffat was born in Scotland, Scottish. By the way, where was David Livingstone born? His son-in-law. Scotland. They're both Scottish. And so Moffat applied to what's LMS? It's not Ladies Missionary Society, okay? What is LMS?
London Mission Society.
Yeah, right? Remember, Carey started the Baptist Missionary Society, but the London Missionary Society came shortly after that. So there's some connection with Mary Smith, who was his employer's daughter-in-law. Okay, he ends up marrying her. So his employer gives his daughter in marriage. He wasn't really excited about Mary going to the mission field, but he accepted it. And they take off for Cape Town, which is way down in South Africa, and they're going alone, just 2 of them, okay? They're not going in a team. One of the things that's going to happen later on is Hudson Taylor, when he goes to China, he's going to really develop this idea of a team ministry. A lot of them went by themselves. But when he gets to Cape Town, he does find other missionaries there. They traveled alone, but there were other missionaries there when they got there. And what do you remember what shocked him about those missionaries? What really just made him upset?
Wasn't there like a lot of quarreling or like they just didn't get along together or something?
There was quarreling. They lived a much higher, I mean, most missionaries do live on a higher standard, but they were really isolated. They had a mission compound. They weren't mingling with the other missionaries. They go out and do service to the natives, Africans, and they come back and they'd be on their compound. And it was really hard. That really bothered him. There were doctrinal differences, a lot of different groups together. Just really, he viewed them as being very worldly. He didn't want to be in a comfortable, high lifestyle. He didn't go to Africa for that, okay? And he meets this guy named Afrikaner. Now, there is a language spoken in Africa called Afrikaans. In fact, I think it's going to also be spoken this year at conference. But he meets this guy named Afrikaner, and Afrikaner really becomes a guide to him and helps him. So they end up going to Kuruman, which is right there in the middle. And so they're down very much in the south part of Africa. So Robert and Mary Moffat, they go to Kuruman. This is a huge problem in Africa. What do you do about the polygamy issue? Well, has anybody here any of you taken current issues of missiology yet? That's next semester. One of the issues that we're going to deal with is the problem of polygamy. What do you do about it? Because the fact is, just about every African man had more than one wife. In other words, it wasn't just accepted, it was the norm. So what do you do about polygamy? Can a guy with more than one wife be a pastor? Can a polygamous person be a pastor?
Most times, yes, but we would say no.
If you look at the qualifications for a pastor in 1 Timothy chapter 3, he has to be the husband of one wife. And so are the deacons, also in 1 Timothy 3.
But was that common though for pastors to be in polygamous relationships, like during that time when that was a struggle, or no?
Well, not everybody agreed on it. I mean, to me, it's clear in the qualifications for a pastor has to have one wife. So how do missionaries deal with that? Well, one way give me an idea. If let's say you're a missionary, nobody who's come to Christ is monogamous. They're all polygamists. You want to nationalize this church. So what's one way you could resolve the problem?
You could say that polygamists can be deacons or pastors.
Yeah, you could just simply ignore the passage and say, hey, this was something that was cultural in Paul's day, but it doesn't apply to everything. You could make it a cultural issue, which I would recommend you not do that unless the scriptures make it clear that it's cultural. What's another way you could deal with it?
Actually tell them they're wrong.
And, right, but if you tell them they're wrong, but still they can't be pastors. So how would you're right.
We should make a requirement they have to be not polygamy.
Okay, so what if they're all polygamous? All your new converts are polygamous. None of them is qualified to be a pastor.
You pastor.
Okay, yeah, you're going to be the pastor at least probably for a generation. In other words, you got young people coming to Christ who are not married yet, and they understand the biblical teaching, then they can remain monogamous, or become monogamous by marrying only one woman, and then they would be qualified to be a pastor. Yeah, go ahead, Laurel.
Well, like, I may be wrong, but isn't something in the New Testament, maybe it's just talking about like the Israelites when they married foreign women, but didn't it say something like if they did have multiple wives, they were to like divorce them or put them aside and go back to one? And like, what did they do with the issue when they weren't pastors, but they were Christians?
Yeah, that was one thing that some did, and I disagree with it personally. They would say only your first wife is legitimate. And so you have to divorce all the others, and then you can, and I mean, and we don't have time today, time's up, but that is a huge problem. I would not recommend that, okay? I mean, does that mean that David's first wife, King David's first wife, was the only true wife? If that's the case, then all of his other wives were issues of adultery and not legitimate marriages, and yet God understands those other wives to be genuine wives. Doesn't mean that God approves of it, but God recognized them as wives. So we'll have to deal with that another time, since time's up, but something they had to deal with. Struggle with. All right, thank you. So